and welcome to this episode of China Edge, brought to you by the SupChina team. I'm your host, Lizzi, an MIT-trained economist turned journalist here at Wall Street TV who covers China and its relation to the world. At China Edge, we go beyond the headlines and guide you, our audience, through the jungle of Chinese regulations. We go deep into industry trends and identify challenges and opportunities in the Chinese market. US House Speaker Pelosi departed from Taiwan after concluding her 18-hour visit, which, according to the speaker, showed the United States' commitment to the self-governing democracy. Meanwhile, China staged military drills and issued a series of stern warnings. Pelosi is the first Speaker of the House to visit Taiwan in a quarter of a century since Newt Gingrich in 1997. Joining me to discuss the implication of the trip is David Sachs, a research fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. His work focuses on US-Taiwan relations and cross-strait relations. Thank you so much, David, for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
So, David, let's just first take stock of the speaker's visit. What has been some of the most memorable moments or most surprising aspect of her trip?
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of memorable moments. I think that the image that will stick with a lot of people is the first female Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States meeting with Taiwan's first democratically elected female president. I think that that's a very powerful image, not one that the mainland likes to see out there. And again, I think that, consistent with Speaker Pelosi's entire career of kind of standing up for human rights and emphasizing human rights, I also think that her visit with human rights activists in Taiwan, including one of the leaders of the Tiananmen Square student movement, is also something powerful and something that's sure to irk Beijing.
If you recall, there seems to be this lack of a coordination on the trip between the speaker and President Biden. Back in the days before the trip took place, President Biden cited Pentagon officials saying the trip was not a good idea. So has there been disagreement between the executive branch and the legislature branch? And given the importance of Taiwan policy, why hasn't the White House convinced the speaker to reconsider the trip?
Yeah, I think that there clearly was a disagreement, as you alluded to. According to reports, the Biden administration briefed Speaker Pelosi multiple times on potential threats to her delegation or to their trip to Taiwan, and tried to persuade her not to go, but she was pretty convinced that she should go. I think that given, her messaging in Taiwan, as well as her article in the Washington Post, I think it's pretty clear that the war in Ukraine was always looming in the backdrop for her. Of course, there are parallels between Ukraine and Taiwan. And I think that in her view, it was important to show solidarity with Taiwan at this time, because there is the fear that China might learn lessons that are not necessarily helpful or conducive to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And I thought, speaking of logistics, one of the most interesting things to me was the circuitous route that her flight took around the entire South China Sea. It skirted the whole South China Sea and added hours onto her trip. And to me, that also indicates that there was potentially a military threat or something that the United States wanted to avoid altogether, given China's military installations in the South China Sea. I never took seriously the threat that was posted on Twitter by the ex-editor-in-chief of Global Times that China might shoot down her plane or escort her plane. Of course, I think that would start a war in and of itself, which China is not looking to do at this point, I think. And so I never took that threat seriously, but clearly, the United States was very cautious in how it went through with the logistics of this trip.
Right. And as the speaker has concluded her trip, at this point, would you say on balance, the speaker's trip is ill-advised, or was it a good move? What are some of the gains versus losses from the trip, as far as we can see?
Yeah, this is being hotly debated, and I think it will be debated for weeks and months to come. In my view, after the trip leaked out and it was in the press, U.S. policymakers and Speaker Pelosi didn't really have many good options. If you cancel the trip, then it looks like you're caving in to Beijing's demands. It looks like it could embolden China to then make more demands on congressional delegations to Taiwan, on senior level travel to Taiwan, and on other aspects of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. But on the other hand, given the political calendar in Beijing, given the threats and warnings that China had issued prior to her trip, I anticipated that there would be a response like we are seeing play out right now. I think there was no chance that China would just stand by and let its threats go kind of unanswered, so to speak. So, we are now where we are. I think that she basically had to go through with the trip after it became public. My personal preference would have been for her to wait until later in the fall, after the midterms, after the party congress in Beijing, where there could have been potentially a calmer political atmosphere for the trip. But Beijing has started with a series of economic and military measures to protest the visit. The thing that I would highlight is that I think that we are just in the opening stages right now of the response. So I don't think that we can necessarily view on Friday what has taken place to date and say, okay, this is the scope of China's response and it is bearable and the cost was worth it because of the benefits of the visit. I think this will play out over a course of weeks and months. I think Beijing will continue to take measures against Taiwan well into the fall and potentially even the winter. And there are many ways that it can escalate against Taiwan diplomatically, militarily, or economically. So, some have argued that in US-Taiwan relations, symbolism is substance, that it's important to be there showing support for Taiwan and that it opens the door for other countries to increase their interactions with Taiwan. I personally understand that argument. I'm sympathetic to parts of that argument. But I do think that given the political atmosphere in Beijing, given the events that are coming up in the fall in Beijing, I think that Taiwan is going to end up paying a pretty steep price for this visit. So my own view is that it would have been better for the speaker and for Congress to actually move forward meaningful legislation that increases Taiwan's preparedness and increases its resilience.
I know in a recent piece on foreign affairs, you actually offer a very valuable historical perspective. So can you sort of recap some of the ideas you have in that piece? How does this time differ from the last Taiwan Strait crisis? What's comparable? What's different?
Yeah, so the last Taiwan Strait crisis in 1995-96 was prompted by the US decision to grant a visa to Taiwan's then President Lee Teng-hui to visit his alma mater of Cornell University, where he delivered a speech on Taiwan's democratization that China objected to, and it responded with a series of military exercises in the Taiwan Strait and close to Taiwan. So, there are a few similarities between the two crises, but there are also some notable differences, I would say. I mean, number one, in the 25 years since the last Taiwan Strait crisis, I would say above all, China's military capability has increased dramatically. Whereas it really did not have the capability to reach out and punish Taiwan militarily at that point, and it didn't have viable military options. China now has a very advanced military, and I think that we're going to see a lot of those capabilities on display in the coming days with the exercises that they've announced in the Taiwan Strait. The other thing I would say is that at that point in time, China still had an overriding interest in having a positive relationship with the United States, which was its most important bilateral relationship. So there was a sense, I believe, among China's leadership that, yes, we have to show that we're unhappy with this visit. We have to, in a sense, punish Taiwan for this, but eventually we want to go back to a productive working relationship with the United States. US-China relations have obviously deteriorated a lot in recent years. My own sense is that in China, there could be a calculation that there isn't a lot to lose by escalating this situation and by doing more to kind of coerce Taiwan. So I think that that's also a key difference between 95, 96, and today. One point that I would say as well is that when you just compare kind of an apples to apples comparison of the military exercises that China conducted during the last Taiwan Strait crisis and today, right now, I think over the next few days, we are slated to see much more significant military activity, potentially even reaching into Taiwan's territorial waters to include areas off of Taiwan's east coast, which means that missiles could be flying over Taiwan itself. And so that is, I think, incredibly escalatory. And so people are debating now, should we call this a crisis? Are we in the midst of the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis? Well, if you just look at the military activities that China is going to carry out in the next few days, we're already surpassing what we saw in the last Taiwan Strait crisis.
Right, and as you alluded to, this is perhaps just the opening of what to come in a relatively long term. We've seen rhetorical denunciations, we've seen live fire drills, we've seen economic pains, meant to impose on Taiwan, import bans, etc., etc. In addition to those, what are some of the other ways Beijing could potentially retaliate against Taiwan and perhaps the United States?
So there is still, I would say, a pretty active debate in the United States on whether China has the military capabilities that it needs to invade Taiwan. Most serious analysts believe that China does not yet have those capabilities and that it's a few years off. So I don't believe that this will essentially quicken whatever potential timeline Xi Jinping has in mind, and that he will use it as the opportunity to launch an invasion against Taiwan. I also don't buy the argument that it really makes sense for China to seize one of Taiwan's offshore islands, like Jinmen. I don't believe that there's much to be gained from that, and I think there's actually a lot to lose from China's perspective by doing that. So I think we'll continue to see the military coercion, the exercises that are planned. China will fly aircraft into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, probably more frequently with more serious formations. We've already seen China cross the median line in the Taiwan Strait. I think it will continue to do so. The one domain where it really could escalate in the military realm would be if it chose to move beyond flying through Taiwan's air defense identification zone and actually fly into Taiwan's territorial airspace or even over the island of Taiwan itself. That would force Taiwan to scramble jets, potentially shoot down a PRC plane. So I think that is one way that the PRC could escalate. We've seen import bans so far. We've also seen export bans from China to Taiwan today. So they can continue to widen those lists. 30% of Taiwan's exports go to the mainland. So this is a significant share of Taiwan's economic output that the PRC can put a squeeze on. What we haven't seen so far, which I think will come in the coming weeks and months, is a diplomatic offensive on the part of the PRC. Under President Tsai's tenure, China has taken a few diplomatic allies from Taiwan and prompted them to shift recognition from Taiwan to the PRC. But there are still, over a dozen countries that recognize Taiwan. So China could target a few of those and try to get them to switch recognition. We've also seen China pressure a lot of international organizations like ICAO and the World Health Organization to not include Taiwan even as an observer. So I think that will continue and probably be intensified, the effort to squeeze Taiwan out of international fora and marginalize Taiwan internationally. I think that will continue. People-to-people ties could also be something that the PRC targets, especially tourism, and also making it difficult for Taiwanese businessmen operating on the mainland. So those are just a few things. I think that another worrying development would be if China essentially tries to, I think, change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, right. In terms of international law and things of that nature. So we saw just, I think, a month or so ago that China stipulated that the Taiwan Strait was not international waters. So we could see something like that as well, a declaration on Taiwan's airspace, a declaration on the waters around Taiwan that really causes issues from a legal perspective and potentially also commercially forces, shipping companies or other, aircraft operators to question how they operate in and around Taiwan.
Right, on to this question of armed unification. As you pointed out in the Foreign Affairs piece, CIA Director Burns recently said he wouldn't underestimate Xi Jinping's determination to assert control over Taiwan. And the risk of that becomes higher, quote, the further into this decade, unquote. Will the Pelosi visit fundamentally change Xi Jinping's timetable? What do you think is going on inside Beijing leadership's mind, if we can take a guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one interesting thing which a lot of people who watch the space carefully were looking for even before the Pelosi visit was whether there would be new guidance on Taiwan issued at the Party Congress. And that was a big area of debate, whether there would be a continued emphasis on peaceful reunification or whether that might be dropped or even added in with another formulation in the Party Congress. In my view, this could embolden those who are arguing for a change in China's approach to Taiwan at the Party Congress. We could see more muscular language regarding Taiwan and cross-strait relations in the fall. So that's one thing to watch out for. In terms of whether China uses force, I think that what CIA Director Burns said is very important to take note of because he is not somebody known for exaggeration. And so I take what he says very seriously. And I think that one implicit constraint on Xi Jinping to this point is that he was always going to angle for a third term. And the assumption was, therefore, that he wanted stability with the United States, stability with cross-strait relations, so that he can prove to the other elites in the Chinese Communist Party that he has it under control and that he should get a third term. But after he's given this third term, I'm not sure what real constraints Xi Jinping feels. Institutionally, I think there are very few constraints on Xi Jinping, and he'll likely be able to elevate more of his allies into key leadership positions. I also think that there is a sense that Xi Jinping wants to do something regarding Taiwan as part of his legacy. Now, how do you define that? I'm not sure. Does it mean starting political talks with Taiwan? I don't think that Xi Jinping necessarily believes he has to achieve unification on his watch, but I do believe that he thinks he has to show some progress towards that goal. And so the question is, how does he define that and how does he seek that out? I mean, the meeting with Ma Ying-jeou that he was able to arrange in Singapore, could have been that moment, but now cross-strait relations have gone much further back in the other direction since then. And I think the ironic thing here to keep in mind is that China's response to Pelosi's visit is just going to further alienate Taiwanese people, I think, from the mainland and from any notion that that unification or any closer relationship with the mainland is desirable. So again, I mean, I think the chances of achieving unification through peaceful means is now, more remote than it has ever been, and will continue, to be even more remote in the future. So the question for me is, does China abandon hopes for a peaceful resolution of this issue implicitly or explicitly, and does it feel like it needs to adjust its policy as a result?
Well, thank you so much, David, for this very insightful conversation. We will include the link to your Foreign Affairs article in the show notes section so our audience can take a further look. Thank you so much for your time, David. I look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. If you enjoy our discussions here, I'm sure you would find value in our new powerful marketplace tool for investors, also called China Edge. It tracks, distills, and analyzes both Chinese language and English language materials about Chinese companies, business leaders, and government entities, and reviews the often hidden links between them. For our YouTube viewers, we are offering a limited time 50% discount. Just go to the link you see on the screen and use the code EDGE50. Also, sign up for the China Edge newsletter. It's a daily 2-minute rundown of China business news you don't want to miss. The link is right here on the screen. You can also click on the link in the video's description section to get your complimentary subscription today.